Hello, everyone. We are back once again with the other episode of the Young and Foolish podcast. And this week, we are just going to be the two of us, Lorenzo and I. Lorenzo and me in this case, grammatically speaking. And this week, we're going to talk about the topic of education.
Yes, sir.
And I guess it's a broad topic, so I think there's definitely a few points on the cover. I don't know how to actually put a label on it right from the top. But the first thing I want to talk about, I guess, is more of like education systems. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's more kind of a accurate and relevant label for this week's topic. If I were to niche down from just education in general. Because the first thing I want to ask you is what you think are the most important things to learn, right, during your, I guess, education, from elementary school all the way to perhaps even university, but just the most important, topics, subjects, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it changes a little bit as you go through schooling. What you should learn all kind of depends on what part of your schooling career you're on, I suppose. Because if you think about it, the very first things that they teach you in school are like the most like fundamental, basic things that you're going to need on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That even very nomadic, even if you go back to nomadic times, people would need to know those really basic stuff. Like, I'm assuming most people, even back in the day, had some idea of like really basic arithmetic, like 1 + 1 is 2, all that jazz. So I think initially that's like what you got to get out of the way, the most basic fundamental stuff that you just need for everything, no matter what you go into. Literally every career choice you could possibly make would benefit from those really basic skills, just communication skills, basic math skills, just really, really basic stuff. And then I feel like when you start hitting high school, that's more like prepping for you for like adult life a little bit and university work as well. Mm-hmm. And then that's when you get a lot more. I mean, it also happens to a pretty considerable degree in elementary school, because you can't just spend that whole time not doing something that's not a little bit more advanced than the super basics. It's not just the super basics. There's a little bit more extraneous stuff that isn't 100% necessary for daily life, but it's still very valuable information that might just be relevant for other stuff. And you need it if you're going to start somewhere for high school, right? High school shouldn't just be a complete switch. There's still an element of familiarity there, but I think what separates high school from like earlier schooling is it is just like an in-between elementary school and university. It is just meant to prep you for university, more or less. And it teaches you those other life skills that you were just too immature to learn back then, like life skills with cooking and whatnot. Hard to teach cooking to like a room of 35-year-olds. You can't just teach it in school. Kids can start cooking, but it'd be better at home, honestly, at that age. It's just too hectic, probably. And just skills like that, you just need maturity that high school students have. And then university, I mean, it is just so specialized. It's so kind of an niche. You can't really say that it should teach you something other than how to succeed in whatever specific field you're in, I feel. Because, your university experience is going to be entirely dependent on the major you have and how much you engage with it. So that would be very different, very subjective.
Yeah, I think the part you said about fundamentals, definitely, once again, we're going back to that. Like, no matter what, like, you just got to cover that. And when it comes to education systems and early education, even perhaps before elementary school and whatnot, you want to be getting into just covering all the basics. That part just can't leave out no matter what. And I really like the part you said about like cooking and stuff like that, especially in like high school. I feel like that's probably a good time to do it because at that time, at the age of the maturity, and that's kind of when a lot of people might not have babysitters and whatnot, and might have more time at home alone if their parents decide to go back to work, if they decide to not hire a babysitter or whatnot, just you have more opportunity even at that point to do more cooking on your own.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then obviously if you learn at that point, then later on when you definitely have more opportunity to do it, it's a good skill to have already, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very important skill. Yeah, exactly. And it's like how can we're talking about cooking, we're talking about food, are you gonna eat out every single time? You're gonna depend on someone else to cook for you every meal? It's such an important thing. You gotta be able to do some form of cooking, and you gotta know some of basic dishes that you could just make for yourself and whatnot. You gotta be able to rely on yourself to do that. So learning something like that at that age, I feel like it's definitely really important. What you said about university and getting specialized, yeah. Especially even later on graduate school with professional schools, or even if you decide not to go to university but other types of tertiary education where straight up just kind of a specialization, more career focused, right? So that part is definitely true. But the part I'm kind of thinking about in terms of just maybe more high school, maybe because I feel like that's a very, very important part of people's
their formative years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very, very important, and I feel like that could really help shape a person's kind of direction in life, and just shape their perspective at that age, which could really affect where they end up later on, right? So I think some of the important things to learn at that age, and I'm going to start off with something that's more directly relevant and just going to be helpful all the way through our life, and that is more kind of the financial literacy. I feel like that is absolutely huge, and that is something I would say similar to cooking, right? Especially here in Canada, in North America in general, I guess we are pretty blessed that it's really easy to be able to find at least part-time jobs, even for high school age kids, if you just applied yourself and actually tried and went out there, right? So learning about personal finance, learning about financial literacy at that age is going to help you, because many people, even in high school, start working, right? So in terms of saving money, in terms of knowing taxes and whatnot, knowing about the different accounts that are going to be available for you. All of those, I think, it's after you're 18 years old. But just to know, just to have an idea.
Start planning it.
Because if you're already making money as a teenager and you have some money saved up, then right when you turn 18, you could start, get a head start on many things with the money you already have. Then obviously, knowing taxes it's gonna help you a lot, right? And knowing how to avoid credit debt, and knowing how to get a good credit score, knowing the importance of having good credit and whatnot, and that type of thing. And just budgeting is huge, right? A lot of people struggle with that. So just a lot of the more basic aspects of personal finance and financial literacy, I think will be very, very important to learn at that age, because if you know it at that age, then it's gonna make your life a whole lot easier when you get older. Yeah, it's gonna be a lot more natural for things to come along too.
If you don't learn it then, you're just gonna have to learn it on the fly when you get older, and then you get those jobs. But to educate yourself doing that, I feel like is definitely a bit trickier, just because you might not even get around to it. Like, how long will you go on for without getting an education? So. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like it is, since it becomes so important later on, it is almost, I guess, sort of an extension of that fundamental thing that you're just going to have to learn at some point. So it makes sense that you just learn it during high school. Very helpful, yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is something that we talk about a lot, and that's probably why I think it's really important. But it's also something that has been seen as important throughout many periods
This goes back
in
like
history,
super far.
all across the world. Really, you look at different cultures and different periods, and what I'm about to bring up is something that has been important to all of them, and that is just world history, classics, all of that. That's a very important part of people's education,
100%.
and that's also how people learn lessons in general. It's through those stories. It's through what all these historical figures have done, right? It's through looking at how things have changed over time. So I feel like that's the other thing that could really help you, especially here in Canada, because I feel like unless you actually take some of the courses, even those are only about like world wars. Not too many things cover a lot about world history, and even just Western history. Just it doesn't seem to be really a part of the curriculum, to be a part of the education system, even though it's something that's just really important in understanding how kind of the world came to be where it's at, how Canada kind of got to this point, and the different things happening in the world. They don't make sense unless you understand the history. Like everything starts making sense once you understand the history. So in terms of having a perspective in terms of understanding the world, and those things I feel like are very important for other even everyday life things that you might not realize because once you start being able to see things in a way, once you're able to make connections between things, you're just gonna start noticing yourself, noticing things more, and perhaps even interact with the world differently because of it. And all of that starts with learning about world history, about learning classics, right?
100%. When you say classics, I'm curious, how far back are you going when you think about classics? Because are you thinking about like it would be good to know, for example, are you talking more about history as a whole, like the entirety of history, and just making those patterns across like many different periods of time, or are you talking more about like just the geopolitical implications of, say, the 19th century going into like the 20th century and like what happened there? So, are you saying just knowing that, for example, or you mean like from a more holistic looking at everything, you just kind of draw these large kind of like inferences from it after considering all of human history?
I feel like, well, that is actually a really, really good question. And I think for me, in terms of if I'm looking at education system and curriculums and talking about what are the most important things to learn about, I would say in terms of more history and classics, I would say the stuff that are the most relevant to today's. So you definitely are going to be looking at some of the stuff we have looked at, such as the French Revolution, right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So
I see what you mean.
you're gonna learn about stuff like the Norman Conquest, 1066. You're gonna learn about stuff like that. You are gonna learn about the World Wars. You're gonna learn about probably the Cold Wars, just stuff that are really relevant in different time periods, but also specific periods that are really just relevant to now, where so many different, even smaller events, you could see how it could affect now. But also looking at like the ancient Rome and ancient Romans, ancient Greeks. I feel like that is also very important because that's kind of how everything started, right? And then there are other aspects that are also important and could really help, but those are more niche and not as directly relevant. So those would be more on the back burner, if anything. So I would, because I think it's important, right?
Oh, yeah, it
so
is.
I would say learn those as well, but there's definitely, in terms of relevancy, in terms of the way the world is now and what you could get out of it, I would say the most important parts needs to be the focus. And those are stuff like I was mentioning about. Obviously, depends on where you are. Like what I really like about Europe, in terms of their education system, is that they really look in both geography and history and whatnot. They look at it from a continental view, right? So they don't just learn about history of their own country, but they also learn about what kind of happens in the whole continent in various time periods, but especially ones that are really relevant to today's. So, like I was saying, stuff like French Revolution, even the Napoleonic Wars, right? You learn about the colonialism, right? Which actually ties in to the Napoleonic Wars, because that's kind of like the point where it basically ended, right? That was kind of a huge thing in terms of that was pretty like the last straw for a lot of the South American colonies. That was kind of at that point, and that whole thing. So once again, just once you learn about different things in history, you can make connections between them. There's really kind of a cause and effect kind of chains that you could really draw up, even though stuff aren't necessarily as direct as some historian might like to make out of it. There are more nuance to it, but very important events and periods and figures like the ones that have brought up. Those will be the focus. And like I said, once again, the classics in terms of ancient Romans, ancient Greece are absolutely huge, because they are always going to be relevant when we're talking about Western civilization, especially.
Oh, yeah, every time.
And obviously, I also think there's definitely should be more of a because now you don't really talk too much about Asia at all. But I think there's some really relevant things to talk about. At least the Mongols, right? At least some of the important Chinese dynasties. At least kind of Imperial Japan in terms of closer to the World War time. And there are just relevant things to talk about in terms of the East as well. And Africa completely gets ignored. Right, I think the Arab world gets ignored, right? So I think it's important to talk about stuff like the Mali Empire, right? Talk about how advanced they actually were, and to talk about the slave trade, the African slave trade that the Arab world engaged in, which was way longer. Well, not necessarily, but it was very long. It was lasting. It was continuous, and that doesn't get talked about. You only talk about the Atlantic slave trade with the Europeans involved, right? So there are obviously very important aspect of history that could really help shape the way you view things and understand why certain things come to be. Because with the Arab slave trade, right, you kind of understand why so many places, especially towards Eastern Africa, that are that has a large Muslim population. Right. When you're talking about the colonialism, you really understand why so many African countries speak French, and similarly, why certain countries over there speak Portuguese and have those influences. Right. So just for you to actually understand more of the world could really just help you instead of being so kind of in a bubble, right? And make sense of more things in general, and allows you to focus on the problems that exist in your country in current times with more perspective, because you could kind of draw parallels between them and perhaps even find better solutions or see how certain solutions could actually lead to more problems. So there are just a lot of relevant things that could come out of learning about these things. And I wanted to bring up those perhaps more niche, more unknown stuff in history to what we learn here in North America especially. And because I think those parts are also relevant, like I was saying. But the main focus, just to really answer your question, are going to be the most important parts, the most relevant parts to our time now, like the French Revolution, the colonialism, and all of that.
I see, yeah. I completely agree 100%. Because if you're looking to draw any sort of useful actionable knowledge out of the moment, of, let's say, right, of like current politics or just your current understanding of the world. Obviously, that all depends on what happened like a second before, like a minute before, and if you just keep extending that to have a perfect understanding of today, or close to perfect, or as close to perfect as possible, then you need the best possible understanding of what happened previously. And then as you go further and further back, more and more information becomes less and less relevant because so many things have changed since then. But you can still, to reach that perfect full understanding, you need everything. But the most important bits, the most relevant bits, I can definitely see why you'd want to focus on that specifically. So that's good. I agree, 100%.
Yeah, but like, don't you just feel like there isn't a focus to something like this, even though like
yeah, well, I mean,
they're in many ways important.
Yeah, they covered like the big stuff like world wars and all that jazz, but definitely all of the less niche stuff. And I also took IB for one semester when I did history.
Okay.
And I remember that class quite a bit. I feel like I remember it better than I remember my socials classes. So I feel like it might bias me a little bit, where I might be considering that 1 year I had an IB as being quite well-rounded, I feel. There was still a lot that they left out. Like, I don't think we ever talked about anything like the Arab slave trade or things like that. We did focus mostly on mostly European history. We looked a lot at, for example, Imperial Russia, which I feel is something that isn't necessarily talked about quite as much in regular schooling.
Yeah.
Because it was like one of 3 units, I think. I might be remembering this wrong. But it was like a big chunk of the entire semester. Versus, I don't know how much attention it would get in the regular curriculum. Because when I switched back to the...
I don't think that's really touched on at all. And also, like...
And I feel like it's super
I feel
important.
like perhaps more relevant...
I actually feel like it's super important to learn about Imperial Russia and the, I guess, the Communist Revolution and how that went down.
Okay.
Because that
aspect.
Yeah, because that sets up, and it also gives you an understanding of how Russia's been in the past. Because I feel like they're still very much the same in the sense that they're just like the wild card of Europe. They're just so weird, so alien. They're like this. I don't know. They were just like the man. What were they called back then? They had a name back in the day, like the something man of Russia, of Europe or something. Or the old man? No, I don't even remember what it was called specifically. But there was a saying that described them pretty aptly.
I don't know.
But if you just look at them, just very strange and weird in general. And they kind of lived, ever since they came to be a superpower, they've been kind of like a sort of Damocles hanging over Europe. Obviously, tensions have been low at certain points, but it's good to understand, feel the imperial history because it gives you the vibe of Russia a bit. Even though the communist revolution
also,
changed a lot of
I feel
stuff
like
too.
it's really interesting talking about like the Romanovs, right?
Oh yeah,
talking about the title of like the Tsar, right? Like you could see how it traced back to Caesar. You could see how it traced back to Romans, right? Like that whole idea, like. Like, in the West, everything is traced back to them. If you want to look at it, but I think also one thing to just bring up, I feel like a more relevant thing to talk about in terms of with the Muslim world, with the Arab world, is the kind of preservation of knowledge when Europe was going through a lot of the Middle Ages, right? Because during that time, they were doing really well, and they kept a lot of the stuff, and they conquered a lot of Southern Europe, right? They have major influence as well, and a lot of like knowledge we have are translated back into like Latin or other languages from what the Arab had of the kind of the ancient world, I guess it would be. So if they didn't do all of that, if those weren't kept, a lot more would have been lost in the so-called Dark Ages.
I think even some of the first translations of, I think it was Socrates into, I forget what the language was back then. But the Western world had to be reintroduced. I think it was Socrates and Plato's works by the Arab world because it had been completely lost in the West. I think it was either that or I'm confusing it with Pythagoras. But either way, a lot of big influential work was lost to the West and then regained after the knowledge was brought back from the Arab world, which I feel like a lot of people don't understand that they were ahead of the game for a long time. And like the library at Alexandria,
a long time.
Oh my gosh, the library at Alexandria, that was nuts. Goated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, I just wanted to bring up the IB absolutely different.
Oh yeah,
compared to like just the regular curriculum you get in BC in Canada.
Oh yeah, totally.
Perhaps in general, but definitely BC. So history wasn't a required course. I only had to take social studies, and history is only one aspect of that. And you don't actually learn about the world wars. You only learn about kind of what Canada did in specific moments. You don't really get into a lot of the actual parts of world wars. You look a lot at kind of England in kind of different times in terms of kind of the government. So obviously they do talk about the Norman conquest. Right, the Battle of Hastings.
Oh yeah.
So that part is absolutely huge. They do talk about Charlemagne.
They do,
right?
Yeah.
They do talk about Martin Luther. They talk about various things. That's the other thing. Religion in general, absolutely huge, and needs to be covered. The major religions, like you need to kind of put the historical stuff in context, and a lot of that is putting it in religious context as well. So that's the other thing that could really help people's understanding of the world.
It's one of those core fundamental pillars of, I guess, human civilization for the longest time. Because if you understand the religion of culture, you understand a lot more about that culture than just the religion. It's not something that's entirely isolated from the rest of the culture. So understanding the religious aspects of things is incredibly helpful. Just knowing where they were along that path is knowing how different it was from, say, the Greeks over to the religious influences present in Germany or whatever, right? During the in that World War I, World War II period. It gives you a lot of context for the things that are happening at the time.
Yeah. And I feel like nowadays people really don't see the importance in having beliefs. I feel like that is something that really allowed a lot of things to happen. People go argue, good or bad, right? And a lot of people say, different some of both. But in general, a lot of it really pushed a lot of things. It really helped a lot of people in many ways.
Yeah, understanding its impacts is you just can't discount it. It was just such a big factor. It's just a variable you have to learn about. And I think in that historical context, the actual, I guess, concerns about legitimizing religion, I think it's almost secondary to the issue at hand. It's not. It's not particularly relevant in that scenario because you're just looking at the effects it had back then and looking at the impacts of that religious factor, because it's kind of like one of those things that people talk about, like military factors, geographical factors, all of those are kind of like more logistical sort of aspects. I think it ties right in with religion too. It's up there with like the economic factors. If they're running out of land, that's big. If they're running out of farmland, that's big. If they get invaded, that's big. More the religion they had and how they practiced it was big, I think. Very telling of the culture. Yeah,
perhaps even bigger in many cases. So we've talked about important aspects in terms of obviously starting with the fundamentals and then getting to some important life skills like cooking, where people would do every day essentially, right? And then we talked about financial literacy, personal finance, and stuff like that. That's gonna really help you all the way through our life, and it's gonna get you out of many messy situations, a lot of situations you probably don't want to be in. So learning about that, especially starting in high school, it's really gonna help you. And then I talked about specific kind of actual subject in world history, and focusing on all the different important events that help you make sense of the world and could really allow you to kind of avoid mistakes other people have made, to learn important lessons from events and people's actions in history, and to just perhaps make it easier for you to solve modern issues because you have a better understanding of the past. You make more sense of the world in general because of it, right? So the next thing I want to bring up is something that here in Canada we might not think as much about because we speak English, but it is like foreign language education. I think that is an absolutely huge thing in terms of education and education system, curriculums. And I think that, like, for many countries, learning how to speak English, how to actually use the language, really give the people a lot more opportunity in the world. And because right now, English is basically a lingua franca, right? Like that's kind of what people like if two people spoke different languages, if they were to communicate with each other, it's probably going to be through English, right? So if you're gonna talk about tourism, you want to go to different countries without actually knowing the language, your best bet is knowing English. That's going to help you the most, right? Even though there are more native Spanish speakers than native English speakers, and Portuguese is the most spoken language in Southern Hemisphere. There are you could look at those facts, because Brazil is like half the population of South America, and then in Africa you got Angola and Mozambique, who's got like 30 plus million people each, and the official language is Portuguese, and Angola actually speaks it. Mozambique only has like some people who speak it, so it's not as much. And I think, I don't even want to talk about like Cape Verde because it's small. I don't think the population is very big, but it is crazy that Portuguese, out of all languages, is the most spoken in Southern Hemisphere.
Did not know that. That's crazy.
But either way, and like most of Africa speak like French and all of that, and France has like the most time zones, right? So in many ways, you can talk about the importance of learning French as well. And China, there's basically Chinese diaspora, right, all around the world, and obviously China has a huge population, so you could talk about the importance of that. But really, end of the day, for most people, the most important second language to learn, if it isn't their first language already, is English, right? That's gonna get you the furthest overall. But as the other points I brought up, it's very useful to learn other languages as well.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
100%.
Spanish, French, Portuguese, Chinese, Mandarin, especially Mandarin, compared to other dialects, right? And perhaps not as focused in Canada, but in other places, definitely second foreign language education, especially in terms of English, is going to be very, very important for people. And all the content available just for that, just in terms of learning, just in terms of appreciation, like that's just it's gonna help you. And one thing I recently was surprised of is kind of the level of English of Lithuanians. Did not realize Lithuania had people spoke English of that level consistently across the population. I was pretty surprised.
Aren't people in like a lot of those Eastern European countries actually pretty good at English, right?
I don't think that is true.
Because I know isn't it in like Ukraine they're pretty good?
Not like Ukraine.
Okay.
Nah.
Okay. So it's just Ukraine. Not Ukraine. I just figured, I don't know why, but because I thought of Ukraine, I knew in Ukraine they were pretty crazy with it. I just assumed there was most of that area, but I guess not.
Okay. Like, I've seen people like going around Ukraine, and there are gonna be some people who speak English pretty well. But like when they just try and talk to some people for an interview or something just to ask about kind of how it is in English, a lot of people spoke really slowly with very poor vocabulary, and the language, like the level of communication was very poor. So could you get by doing most basic things in English in a lot of places you're including potentially, right? It does feel like that is possible. It's plausible, right? But I would say in place like Lithuania, there's a lot of people where you spoke English to. They're native speakers almost. It's not at the level as certain Nordic countries. It's definitely not at the level of Netherlands, where people are basically native speakers. Like it's ridiculous. Netherlands, a shout out to them. Very good job. But yeah, Lithuania, I was so surprised by how well so many people spoke English. I was like, hey, yo, dang.
Wow.
I don't know about Latvia, but I think Estonia is also relatively good. I think Estonia is pretty good. And obviously, that's because out of the Baltic countries, Estonia is the most like the Nordic countries because it's very similar to Finland in many ways. It's actually a Finnic language, right? Estonian.
Oh, wow.
And obviously, there's a ferry going from Tallinn and Helsinki. So there's a lot of ties between those two countries in terms of culture and history and language and all that. So it kind of makes sense that Estonia has pretty good English education because it's more similar to Finland, which is a Nordic country, and they're known for having really good English education. But Lithuania, just kind of a random country, just a random piece of large land.
There must be a reason for that.
Northeast Europe. And yeah, honestly, I would like to know why it is. Well, actually, I would say one of the reasons might be because they cut the most ties from the Soviet, in all like Soviet, post-Soviet Union countries, right? Because like, in terms of historically speaking, the Lithuanian people, a lot of them are put in gulags and whatnot, and what they got out of being a part of the Soviet Union just wasn't nearly as much as other countries, and for them it just wasn't a good experience. So they really cut ties a lot with that and really pushed towards more of a European kind of approach in many things, and you could see that throughout their country, even in just architecture and whatnot. And like you won't see too many other like Soviet ties in general. And I feel like maybe one of the reasons why there's a focus in English education is because of that direction they were pushing, and that might have been one of the policies, but that is just speculative. Just from trying to figure it out from the stuff I do know about it. It'll be interesting to actually research and see what the real reason is. I might be right, but who knows?
Yeah, it sounds like it could definitely be possible. Yeah.
Yeah, English education absolutely huge, and even for a place like Canada, where it's like multicultural, where French is official language. French is really spoken in Quebec as well as like Ottawa and certain parts of Ontario, as well as many parts of Eastern Atlantic Canada, right? The maritime provinces. It kind of, and it's such a huge part of like its history and culture overall as well. It just kind of sucks that in the western part of Canada, very few people really know French, and the level of French of an average person living in like BC is ridiculously low. And
I feel like it kind of, I feel like it kind of ties back to what we're talking about relevancy, because I feel like most people, and the thing also about language learning is that the learning that you do in school is, I mean, it's quite minimal, right? No one's gonna. I feel like but then again, I stopped taking French about grade 8 or 9. Whenever
8 was the last year,
right? 8 was the last year that you had to take it, and then I switched over to Spanish because easy peasy, so easy. I wasn't going to pass that up, so it might be a little skewed for me because it could be said that I didn't really learn much from my courses in Spanish because it was basically just keeping me from getting rusty. That was basically all it was. So I never really had to struggle with the learning process there. You know, I never studied for my IB Spanish exam ever. I was just like, if I don't get a 7, I'm going to be shocked. You know? So my take on it might be a little bit removed from that perspective, but I would imagine that like your average kid in there's second language courses in high school might not, if they don't see the value in it and they don't put in any effort outside of school, feel like it's definitely kind of knowledge that you might forget really fast. Like, for example, like you and Sharyar, but then again, you've done a lot of studying outside of school, but Sharyar, I feel, probably knows a bit of French, right? He knows a bit of French still. Because he was quite into it.
He does.
But he was also, I feel, probably a little bit more on the studious side. And what level is his French at? I don't know how much he studied outside of it, but it's still at a very rudimentary level, right? Yeah. So it might be good for barely getting around, but for a lot of people who maybe don't see that sort of thing, and they aren't as studious as him, so like your average student, I feel, they're not going to benefit that much from the language courses because the level that they attain would basically barely help them survive somewhere, I feel. Then again, I don't know how much you actually end up learning throughout the course of those high school courses because, again, my experience is very different. And in that case, you have a limited amount of time to learn a language that you might not see as entirely relevant to your experience. And then I feel like it's almost, I don't know how to put it. Like it's really useful learning a second language, but in a high school high school setting rather, I feel like it's very difficult to accomplish anything too good, you know? I feel like it's nice that they split it into, I feel like it's nice that they split it into either Spanish or French because then you get the choice, right? I'm kind of biased too because I always just think
some school offer other languages too.
They do.
It's just our school only offer those two.
Yeah. I feel like adding that variety is much better because when you make the choice, it makes it a lot easier. Because for me in my head too, I didn't want to be in a French class, even though I already knew Spanish, so it probably would have been better for me if I had applied myself in a French course. I would have learned more. But still, I was just thinking like, why would I spend my time in French class when I can go to Spanish class where way more people speak Spanish, right? Because, like, in theory, Spanish is more useful in, like, a global context than French would be. And I'm not trying to go to Quebec, you know, or those areas in Ontario. I'm not interested in them. So I always kind of figured...
Or Africa.
that one too, for example. Like, why go to Africa when you go to South America, you know? Come on. Basic math. So I was like, so in that context, I was like, I just didn't see the value in it. Even though learning French is valuable, I feel like it's just, from the amount that you could learn in that high school setting, it just wasn't very enticing, you know? To me, at least.
Yeah, so here's the point I wanted to make. In terms of the importance of learning other languages, we did a whole episode on language learning, and we kind of focused on kind of the cognitive aspect in terms of perspective aspect, right? And then right now I'm bringing up more kind of in Canada French in terms of culture and history, and certain parts of Canada that really speak French. It's also relevant in those senses. And obviously globally there are places that speak it, so we're interested in that. Those could be reasons why you do it. But in general, I feel like a lot, in compared to other parts of the world, North America, there's a lot of just what do you call it, monolingual? I guess. Like there's a lot of people who only speak one language, right? And they're really missing out on so many important things you get out of speaking other language in general. And That's one point I want to make for some of those people who think it's not important, right, to learn other language.
Oh yeah, no.
Like if you really want to look at a lot of the importances, like in the language learning episode, I definitely feel like we talk a bit about it, and all the stuff we brought up today. So there's the kind of why it's important, right? And then the part you bring up about the actual how much you learn from this high school setting. See, that's one of the biggest problems that I see, right? Like in other places where people learn foreign languages, they even just from learning at school, they get so much out of it. They retain so much, just because the way it's structured, right? And one thing that people come to Canada, no matter where they come from, literally anywhere else, basically, they'll tell you that it's so easy, like in terms of like the terms of kind of, I don't even know how to put it directly, but the school work and how much there's like no pressure at all applied.
Yeah, no.
And the level that they require you to be at and throughout the ages tend to be pretty low until you reach like university essentially. So just really, really chill in so many different aspects. Even how long the school day is shorter than like most places. So in so many ways, one of the reasons why you don't get as much out of just learning the language here in Canada is because of the way it's kind of set up. Whereas we've seen other countries, like I said, with English, it might be more different because the content that they consume regularly, so much of it is just going to be English and just easier to learn in that sense. But also even those just from school without even other stuff outside of school, like I feel like they retain more, and you could definitely see that when those countries, through the people who learn other languages in those kinds of countries, where people learn German or stuff like that, and they retain so much of it. Where people learn French as a second language and they actually know the language. Where people
learn. Idea when they start learning those languages over there? Like, do they start from elementary school or do they start in high school? They usually
start young. Well, in Nordic countries, they usually start off young, I believe. And in Canada, I don't know. I think in BC at least, I think French you start learning in like grade 5 maybe, and all of those classes are basically just BS. Like, unless you go to French immersion and actually try it, like, and even some people who just kind of, like, I don't know how they got through French immersion, to be honest. I'm like, they literally just don't know French at all. I'm like, how did you survive? Like, what was your school like? What was happening?
That's actually crazy.
But like, usually French immersion is actually not bad. But yeah, elementary school, foreign language education in Canada, complete joke.
Yeah, I feel like
absolute
that's another big factor too, because I feel like in the back of my mind when I was in French class, for one, I had like the idea, I was like, okay, well, so like grade 8 and 9, the marks don't matter until I get to the higher level, or not higher level, until I get into like the higher grades, and then I'll just be doing Spanish anyway, so why do I need to bother with this? So I had, that probably set me up for failure in my French journey. But I feel like another aspect of it was that we didn't start too young, because I feel like you're like more acutely aware of like, okay, well, I'm at such a basic level, right? When you're in high school and you're doing like these super basic lessons that are necessary, right? You kind of understand how much further you have to go, and then it just seems like in that class environment at that specific pace, it just doesn't seem like the best way to learn a language. Though it's important to get it out there, because if you don't standardize it and you put it in like the standardized education, then most people probably wouldn't get around to doing it. So it's kind of in a weird spot, because like I feel like it's necessary in like a well-rounded education system to have like some second language in there. But on the other hand, I can't say that it's also the most important aspect of it, or that it's one of the most important aspects of it. Just because for you to get the full value out of that language learning experience, you really have to put in work. Well, actually, quite a bit of work outside of the school context. But it gets your foot in the door.
With band, we had it like we were exposed to it constantly. Like so, like even within the system
They're exposed to
currently,
French.
there are ways.
Or,
No, in band.
Oh, you just mean
Yeah. I'm just talking about different
different
courses.
course,
Like,
yeah.
It's possible to get a lot of exposure, interaction with the material on a consistent basis, even in this system. So if the system were to be changed more like some of the other ones,
the band was also for a year. I mean, I guess it alternated with PE, right? Up until did that switch at all?
For jazz band in grade 11 and grade 12 at our school, we had it every single day. Right?
Yeah.
So. But that's the thing. Other places they have it every single day, right? And they are immersed in the language early on, so they start earlier. The requirements are consistently higher, and they are exposed to it for longer periods of time, more consistently throughout the school year. So in all those aspects, they just do a better job of foreign language education, and when someone teaching you in the language and speaking to you in the actual language, that's going to help you a lot. And when that is done consistently, that's going to help you a lot. So even without interacting with it much outside of it, there are ways for it to be done where you could really benefit from it. And I just think it's really important, but that could be a biased view for sure, just because some people could say the same about like physics. Whereas I think you only need a pretty basic understanding.
I feel like,
and anything above that is not relevant to real life that much.
I feel like the value in physics that most people try to point out is the problem-solving skills, because the way you go about solving physics problems and that level of abstraction you need to get to sometimes is quite useful. And in physics, it's kind of the only time you're going to get a lot of the more practical ideas, because otherwise it's kind of just you're in math class and Jimmy buys 99 watermelons at the store, goes in the car. Versus physics, it gets you into more. It's kind of like an intermediary of like, okay, this is how you can solve real world problems with math or whatever, right? Or how you can make those abstractions. Versus in math class, it's very far removed. It might not show you immediately how to apply those tools in a problem solving context. So
so that's the final thing I want to bring up in terms of important things to learn, and that is critical thinking. I think that is a thing that is completely not lacking in our education system. There's the focus just really isn't there for the most part, I would say. Like the way stuff are done is so much you just get a worksheet and just do it based on just like you don't have to think that much, right? In general, like you don't have to think that deeply about things either. Like both in terms of material and the way things are done, it's kind of putting you in that place. I remember so much of the reading exercises. It was just reading stuff and then answering questions, and so much of those questions directly right from like the paper.
Yeah, there wasn't like it wasn't like you had to generate an answer and like assimilate the knowledge into something.
Exactly.
You didn't have to process the knowledge at all. You just had to like regurgitate, memorize this. Okay, like who did this, what year? This guy did that. Versus like the more broad questions. I feel like that was one of my favorite parts about IBs, because especially Mr. McMartin's classes, my history teacher, because he made us do so many essays. It was mad. I think at one point we were writing one almost every class in preparation for the exam or something like that. We wrote a lot of essays. And when you write an essay, it demands that you understand the material at a higher level, and so that you can apply those critical thinking skills and generate something worthwhile. But yeah, I agree, because there's so much of the time, and it makes sense for a lot of the courses as well, though. For a lot of courses like physics or biology, things like that, it just kind of lends itself to just being one of those memorization tasks where it's like you just memorize as much knowledge as you need to,
Yeah.
or you just memorize very specific tasks, and there isn't all too much critical thinking skills required up until the highest level of analysis, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the humanities courses are pretty good for doing that if the teacher knows what they're doing. They usually do an okay job of getting some critical thinking out of you sometimes.
Yeah, so I definitely think something really important and a focus for education systems, I guess. Yeah, so I feel like that those are the important aspects that I think I wanted to bring up in terms of education system, what you should be getting out of it, especially coming up through your primary and secondary education. And then the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the examination, the actual structure of things. And I want to talk about this because what I have learned in the past few years is that in Italy, most exams are oral exams. That's how it's done. It's a one-on-one with the teacher, and it's all oral exams. It's not, you don't sit down and do multiple choice stuff. I think multiple choice exams, even multiples, are just not a good way of doing exams. And I actually really don't like multiples in terms of stuff. They almost trick you. Like it's kind of designed to trick you rather than actually test your knowledge. It comes down to certain details. It comes down to very, like it does test your knowledge in a way, but like that's not the point. Like if someone could explain something to you in a way that makes sense, like that's the point. That's what you want to get across. And oral exams really make sure someone knows their stuff in that way, and it doesn't trick you in any ways. And I really like that kind of idea.
Sounds interesting. Never heard of that before. Like I've heard of oral exams, but only in like a language learning context where like they have an oral exam to see how good your speech production is. But for other courses, that would sound interesting. That sounds good because if you can talk about something, then chances are you probably know what you're talking about, hopefully, right? You can't really BS your way through an oral exam the way you might be able to for other stuff. For other stuff, you could literally just Sparks Notes it, almost. That's basically what it feels like. It's just asking you to fill out like Sparks Notes stuff sometimes, and it's like, it doesn't ask you to think about this stuff anymore. But with the oral exams, you kind of have to have that next level of knowledge. Yeah. I will say the multiple choices, I feel a good way of like gauging whether or not somebody knows a lot of like just the raw facts, because a lot of times it's important to memorize stuff. Like for example, you're in a biology course. Biology courses rely a lot on memorization because that's just kind of what it is, right? With physics, there's a lot of math skills and other stuff that go along with it. So it's more of a skills-based course than, say, biology, where it's more of a content-based course, where it is a lot of memorization and you have to know a lot of stuff. So in that way, I feel multiple choices are nice because you can't have somebody write essays on just the entire course load or all the course material, right? That'd just be way too much to write about if they understand it at that level. So even though you can't get like a very in-depth processed analysis or I guess demonstration of their knowledge with multiple choices, it's kind of limited in that sense. You don't get to understand how well that person knows the material, and it doesn't really tell you much
also
about,
gives them the opportunity to guess, right?
It does, yeah.
So,
but I mean, yeah, but I mean, obviously, depending on how many choices you have, that I feel like that only really comes into consideration when they don't know their stuff. And then it's like, okay, they're going to get at least 20% or something like that based off of chance. But I feel like it's just a good tool for just kind of getting an understanding of the breadth of their knowledge, or I guess the scope of their knowledge. see if they've actually read the textbooks, read the readings, all that jazz. Smoke the most basic level.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think for that it does serve that purpose. But I feel like for stuff like a final exam, for anything that's worth a lot of marks, that shouldn't be the point. That shouldn't be like the way to do it. Right?
Having final exams be entirely multiple choice, I feel like that wouldn't be the way. I feel like that's why they do. Oftentimes you'll see multiple choice for like the first 20 questions, and then short answer for like a couple questions, and then maybe have a few long answer questions. I like the way those tests are designed because they kind of examine your knowledge at all those different levels. Like, okay, well, how much is the scope of your knowledge, right?
Yep.
And then multiple choice. Okay, do you know a little bit about everything? And then that's where the short answer comes in. And it's like, okay, do you know the really important in-depth stuff? And that's where the long answer comes in. So I feel like that's a very balanced way to go about a test. Yeah. Not just
so
multiple choice.
Yeah. So I really like more assignments and essays, and then like what I was mentioning about the world exams. I feel like those are ways where you could really see a person understanding a lot more, right? And also it gives them more time to actually just do the thing, because for the purpose of a multiple choice exam, like you're not giving a lot of time. You prepare, you study, and then you show up and you get like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to do it, and that's that. So in terms of assignments, it allows people to take the time and really think about things and engage with the material more. So in terms of actually for someone to learn, it's much better for the person to learn, not just test their knowledge, but to learn from the process of doing it, right? So those are some stuff I like and the reasons why I like them. And in general, I just feel like multiple choice are done so often just because it's easy, especially
100%.
Scantron, right? So that's kind of like the main thing why people do it. It's not even because they actually think it's a good way to do it, right? So instead of focusing on stuff like that, of ease, right? Just put more money and more power, manpower into marking other forms of exams and evaluations that actually benefits a student's process of learning, as well as the overall ability of you as a marker to see their overall understanding rather than just see if they know certain facts and stuff like that. In terms of multiples, which is one of the best arguments for multiple choice for many people, because it adds another dimension to it, right? It makes it more difficult and it tests the knowledge a bit more. In terms of those, like, there's still aspects of guessing, right? And also, a lot of times, at that point, you're almost taking away the whole point of what you brought up with multiple choice, and that is just seeing if they know the facts. Because at that point, there's certain things that just kind of, if you actually give an opportunity to explain your thinking, like both of these kind of like you will be able to get the marks, but if you were to just put down the answer, like that's not going to happen, right? Stuff are kind of often putting away that's like, okay, that isn't actually true, but it's kind of true. Should I include that as one of the answers? Because that's one of the things you have to think about for multiples when we're talking about that style of multiple choice exams, right? So there's almost an aspect you're kind of being tricked in a way, and it's asking you to, the way it asks you to think, it's kind of questioning. It kind of takes away that critical thinking. It's like, obviously you want to think about this more, whether it is or isn't, and you would explain either. But at that point, you're just asked to just pick an answer, include it or don't include that as a part of your final answer, right? So, and that's the other thing I don't like about it. So when people really look at it without the financial and manpower restraints, I feel like people in general wouldn't do multiple choice exams. They might have multiple choice quizzes that they could even be pretty frequent just to see if you're actually paying attention, if you're doing your readings, if you're getting the basic facts, because it's really useful for those things. But when it comes to actual evaluations, assignments, or talking about presentations, or talking about world exams and stuff that allows people to really take the time and think about it, and actually showcase the depth of their knowledge when they're doing it. So in so many ways, I just think that those are more beneficial. And in the real world, those are actually more relevant as well, because if you're working for anything, whether for a company or as a contractor, as a freelance worker, you're presenting stuff to your colleagues, to your boss, to your clients, right? You are speaking to them. You're explaining things to them, right? There's the aspect presentation. There's aspect of world exams, right? And also, in terms of assignments, you're actually doing things. Those are hands-on. Those are practical. Those are stuff that engage your critical thinking more. And those stuff are obviously going to apply more to actual work environments and real-life situations as well. So I feel like in terms of multiple choice exam, it should really just be limited to what you're talking about. And those should just be quizzes that aren't worth that much, or worth anything at all. Those are just a way for the teacher to see what the class is doing and where they're at, and in terms and that kind of thing. And it just kind of sucks to think about how in university so many examinations are still just multiple choice, and it really just makes you question the whole system and the structure of it, and how well that is doing to actually teach you things, to evaluate you, and to prepare you for the real world, which are three things that I think are all very important in an education setting.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I didn't even consider what you mentioned there about like presentational skills that you have to use later on. That's actually a really good point. That makes me, because I always like the idea of the oral exams you're talking about. I always thought they were good, but that makes me like it even more now. So that's good. Yeah, that's a good point. But 100%, yeah. I would like to see more of that being done. I personally haven't run into that many like straight up multiple choice stuff in university outside of like the weekly quizzes or whatever. But that's exactly what they just did, just weekly quizzes to make sure you're still doing the readings and whatnot. Like I've seen it in final exams, but I don't think I've done an entirely multiple choice exam. Or if I have, it's been for say something like math or physics, where it's like I think. But then again, it's been a couple of years, so my memory's hazy. But even then, it would be just numbers and a multiple choice thing. So in that sense, it's like it's basically equivalent, because you'd still have to do the work on paper. It just makes it easier for them to mark it, and it might give you a chance to guess at it. If you have no clue how to do something, you get an answer that's way off, and then you just YOLO it. You're like, okay, this looks like nothing of the four options, but it's probably D or something like that. But beyond that, in like those, like for example, for my English courses or any of those types of courses, I haven't seen that many multiple choice things come up. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess could be different. Yeah, I've just come across a lot.
Really?
In first year, most of exams were like that. Yeah. Part of that is because of just large courses. And obviously I was talking about financial and manpower restraints, right? And just kind of the whole logistics of setting up exams, marking exams, and designing exams. that actually work for all those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which brings up to the second point I want to talk about in terms of structure and like education systems and like the way things are done, I guess. And that is the class sizes, right? That is a very, very popular topic throughout history, through all across the world, is people talking about class sizes. And for me, I definitely feel like so many situations, it's a really large class size a lot of the times, especially in university, especially for the basic courses. You go in, you sit down, you listen to a person talk. There's no interaction. Like, like what are you even doing? Like, you're literally just sitting down, listening, and taking notes, and someone talking, and that's it. Like, that's not very engaging overall. Like, you have to be really interested in the material, and the person has to be they gotta be a really good speaker, and those two things are usually not both.
They're rarely.
It's very rare both of those things coexist, right? In university setting, so many lecturers are just not very good. Like, they are pretty boring. Like, unfortunately. Even some of the presentations are designed poorly. And for a lot of students, especially in the basic courses, they're not that engaged with the material. A lot of times it's when they get into more niche stuff that they become really interested in the material, right? A lot of time for the basic stuff to be more interesting to people, they need to be more engaging other ways for them to learn more about it, for them to think about and connect more with the material. Because at that point, that's when they're going to be more interested in the material without putting in certain work and effort and learn a certain amount, right? A lot of time you don't actually become interested. You become interested and after a certain threshold of effort and knowledge, right? And that's one of the reasons why I like to learn a little bit about so many things, because I don't know if I'm actually going to be interested in the thing unless I learn a little bit about it, right? And also, if you're going to learn a lot about something, you got to at least learn a little bit about it, right?
Yeah, of course.
So for you to just go sit in a lecture and listen to that, that's not a good way for you to really reach that point, because, like I said, those two things, if the person already isn't that good of a lecturer, then you really got to put in a lot of effort and really be interested. But most people aren't just going to be interested in the material. For a lot of people to even be possible of them becoming interested, they got to reach the threshold I was talking about. And you're just not going to reach that when you're sitting in there like listening to a lecture that's not engaging, right? I mean, so some of my favorite classes have been in smaller settings, smaller classroom sizes, with more interaction with both the professor and fellow classmates, right? So some of the things they do better in lectures is getting you to answer questions using like eye clickers.
Oh my gosh, eye clickers.
But like that still just sucks. Like that, it's so limited, and that's not very engaging. It's a bit better, but it's still so bad. But in smaller classroom settings, it's just so much better in so many ways, and so much easier for you to engage. And once that engagement is there, you actually learn more about it. Then it's more likely you become interested in the material. And when you're more interested in the material, obviously, it's more likely you learn and more likely you do well. And those are things that you will want an education system to encourage and get to the point, right? Really get you to the point of being interested in learning and doing well, right? So I feel like class size and how large they are so often, even in university, especially in university, I should say, is something I don't like.
Yeah. I feel personally over the last couple of years, especially since Corona hit, I've seen lectures. It kind of changes on a course-by-course basis. Some courses this is more true for than others, but I've almost started to see a lot of the lectures as supplemental almost. to the readings. Like, for example, my behavioral neuroscience course this semester, there was literally no lecture. There's no lecture at all. It's literally a 3-minute video that they whip up every week. A 3-minute video they whip up every week. And it just talks about literally the absolutely most basic things that you need to know for that chapter. And everything else is just from the readings. So, literally, that course is basically absolutely zero for the lectures and everything from the readings. And personally,
how much are you paying for that, bro?
It's a very good textbook. And to be fair, the textbook is written.
Just buy the textbook.
It is written by the professors. The textbook is written by the professors.
Fair enough.
So
I
guess. In a way, I guess they.
At least it's their stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, at least they put it together.
It's a really good textbook. And they have weekly quizzes set up. And I think, these are like 20 questions. I forget. I think this is the one where it's like 20 questions every week. And there's a fair bit of there's a fair bit of material to get through every week. So the multiple choices, I feel, pretty apt choice for it. But in that case, it works out because I'm quite motivated, and I feel like that's an issue that you kind of touched upon, and that's motivating learning. I feel like in general it is harder for lecturers to get that going in larger environments themselves. I remember my Calc 2 professor would go out of his way to motivate whatever it is that we were learning about. So if we were going to learn about, I don't know, I forget what we were learning about in Calc 2, but whatever we were going to talk about, he would set up like an interesting problem, like, okay, this is an issue you might run into. This is how people would solve it using this method. We're going to learn about this today or whatever. So he would go out of his way to motivate whatever it is we were learning about. And that's an issue that is kind of prevalent in education from, I feel like, the very beginning. Because if you can't get the people to engage in it, it's very difficult for them to actually learn anything useful and retain anything useful to make those stronger synaptic connections in their brains. So motivating it is just so important, and it's not something that's focused on too much. Some professors, some of the better professors, are acutely aware of this, and they'll get you to, become engaged with the content, either through their presentation style or because they'll just make it sound so interesting, however they do it. Versus a student coming in from high school into university might, be thinking like, okay, well, it's the lecture. I'm here to learn. What is it that I need to learn, right? They go to the lecture. The lecture is actually terrible. And then they might not be used to depending on the readings as much. And then they're going to feel in a really tough spot because they're not going to want to learn the content if they don't manage to motivate themselves to do it, which is easier said than done. I'm not saying that the lack of success in any of these courses are due to like a lack of motivation per se, because I feel like you can generate that to some extent. It's kind of a lame excuse to use if you do poorly in a class to say, I just wasn't motivated enough, even though it might be true. So it's kind of a weird thing where it's like you have to at least be able to motivate yourself, because a lot of the times your professors won't do it. Like in those larger classes, it's rather difficult to do it. But yeah, personally, I've just kind of almost gotten to the point where lectures are just supplemental. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. So many of those classes, there aren't any readings. It's you show up to lecture and that's that. Everything is just run the lecture.
Like a course by course basis. So then, that's rough. Yeah, if there's no readings and the lecture's all you got, yikes.
Yeah.
No way.
And everything's coming from the lecture, and the lecture is terrible.
No, that's not it. That is not it. No comment. Yeah. This is terrible.
See, sometimes it's like the stuff are all from slides. So like even if you don't pay too much attention to the lectures, the slides are good. And then there's like practice questions and material like that. And then, it's pretty solid. But overall, I haven't been in many courses where it's so much reading based. Reading stuff they're always supplemental. Like there's one course now that the reading is actually really relevant. And there's other course where it's like you have to do the reading as kind of the basic, but then all the actual stuff we're going to talk about and require you to do is based on more than just the reading, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So the reading is more of a basic thing that they build upon. It's like prior knowledge you gotta have.
You go into it,
just the fundamental. Yeah, exactly. The foundation you're working from, right? So reading often either acts as that or as just supplemental stuff. There was one course I did completely online right when the coronavirus hit, and that was a history course. And that was the only history course I've taken so far in university. So because it's all online, because it's a history course, that one was definitely reading based, and I don't think there was any lecture, right? So I also understand that, and to be honest, I don't mind those kind of situations. And I also like that was an essay-based course.
Oh, that's nice.
So it was literally just readings and writings. Like, he had no lectures, no quizzes.
Nice,
you read all this stuff, and then they just give you some prompts for you to write about. And obviously, you gotta make references to the readings. So
that's basically what it
is. So like those are actually pretty solid kind of style of courses, and they make sense in various humanities settings. So those I don't mind at all. But I haven't been in so many situations where you could just rely on the reading and not really look at lectures. Never really been in that situation before. So for me, the class size, that's why it seems like such a big issue, because you kind of have to rely on the lecture a lot for you to learn the material and for you to do well on the exams. And big classes, it really makes that difficult a lot of the times compared to smaller classes, like I was talking about, where you are actively engaging, actively learning by interacting with the teacher and interacting with fellow classmates in regards to the material, right? You're participating more in discussions, because sometimes they'll ask you a question in large classes. One person's going to answer, right, out of like hundreds of people. But when you're in a setting where it's like 10, 20, 30, 40 people, it's much more likely it's going to be you. You are more, depending on who you are. Some people aren't affected by this, but a lot of people are. So in a smaller setting, it's also more likely you actually raise your hand, right? It's almost like the whatever crowd call ambulance situation exactly. It's similar to that in a way, right? So
I forget what it was, but we talked about it, and I think it's a little different than the bystander effect, but we talked about it where it's like in group settings people tend to do less work almost, and they tend to put in less effort to things. Like they do tests where it's like they had a guy and they put headphones on him, and they're like, okay, we need you to scream as loud as you can. It's just you. And then they recorded how loud the scream was. And then they put some earmuffs on the guy and it's like, okay, we need you to yell in sync with everybody else who's going to yell in 5 seconds. But he couldn't hear him, obviously, right? But he thought he was the only one yelling. And you record like a drop in like how much, and their volume actually. So if they think they're doing it with other people, they'll put in less effort. I think it's kind of like the same thing in this situation where... But it is kind of bystander effect. It is kind of like that call to action almost. But yeah,
I feel like it's a mix of both.
Bit, yeah.
I feel like both things are applying in this situation because one, in a way, you are doing less work for sure. But in other thing, if someone's gonna call upon you and you're like, oh, someone else is gonna do it. It doesn't have to be me, right? So I feel like both of these things apply in varying degrees. I don't know what percentage each would, but it also depends on the person, obviously. People aren't all the same. There are always going to be outliers, and in these environments, studious people, the people who like attention, perhaps there are various things that's going to affect it. But in general, in a smaller setting, in both of these effects, it's gonna lead you to think that someone's gonna be more likely to participate in the class, right? And if you're talking about like stuff where I have been in like a 10 people classroom, like if the professor asks a question, like sometimes it's just a very difficult question that you really have to think about, and it's just hard to answer. But then it's like no one else answers. It's like, okay, you know what? I kind of have to answer because we're all just gonna sit here in silence like this. So like even when you don't have like a really good answer or something like that, like it really pushes you to be okay. You know what? I just gotta do it, man. Like we're not gonna stay here in silence and have the professor just stare at the 10 of us. Like, come on, what are we doing here? So like even if like sometimes like it just gets you in a situation like that. Okay, you know I'm just gonna do it. Whereas in other situations, just say okay, I don't have to engage at all. Like because even if you're in a really large setting and literally no one answers. It's like, okay. It's like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
The person isn't looking at you. It's not looking at them. And it's like, it doesn't feel personal.
It's very impersonal.
Right? It just feels like you're just one of many. That's just a person in the front talking. It's not, there's no intimacy. There's no personal connection. And in so many, because of so many reasons, even if nobody answers, you're not gonna feel any way about it. Just say, okay, whatever.
Just it is what it is.
Right? Yeah. Whereas, if someone's looking directly at you after they ask you a question and there's only a few people there, just say, are you really gonna sit there in silence? Like, just come up with something, say something, man. Like, it's like a conversation almost, right? It really helps you engage. It's like. It's like us talking on this podcast. One of us asks the other person a question, they just don't answer at all. They just say, okay, what are you doing, man?
It's awkward.
It's just a different setting, right? It's a different dynamic. There is more personal, there's more intimate connection there. And there's obviously going to be more interaction because of that and also because of other factors.
It feels more like you're being asked the question.
In so many
ways.
ways.
When you're in that small classroom versus when you're in that classroom setting, it's more like watching just a presentation. It feels like a general question to like the audience, But then you're like you're part of the audience, but you aren't the audience yourself, so you don't feel like you have to answer it. Yeah.
So it just makes it a lot easier for you to engage in smaller settings, and I feel like that should be a push, not just smaller settings, but just. The key thing is the engagement, right? And smaller settings, one of the things that's going to help you with that. So in terms of structure, that's the other thing that I really wanted to point out is just how much easier it is for people to engage in general when they are in those smaller classroom settings and those smaller class sizes, right, with less people. So. Yeah, those were the kind of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of structure and how things are done in a education system. The way exams are, right, or the way the evaluation is, right? Because the way the evaluations, like I said, it affects the way you learn, affects how much it can actually tell your understanding, and affects how well you are preparing yourself for actual work and real life situations. And then now I talk about the small sizes of a classroom of people in the class that goes with engagement, which obviously comes back to my point about the threshold of kind of you have to reach for you to actually want to be learning the material and getting interested and all that. And that obviously going to affect how much you learn and how well you do. And those are important in terms of education. So those are kind of the key parts I wanted to bring up. I don't know if there's anything in terms of structure or how things are done that really came to your mind that you think is important to talk about, that where are like issues that need to be addressed.
Nothing in particular, no.
Even praises, you think something's actually done really well, just the way it's set up is actually really brilliant, and people don't pay enough attention to how well it's done.
Nothing stands out too much. I feel like it does an okay job right now for the current structure we have. It's not bad. It's not bad, not bad. I like what you were talking about.
Overall, it's not bad, yeah.
Overall, it's not bad at all. Especially with regards to
I think so much.
Especially, I feel like it's quite okay. I feel like in like the high school and like provincial level stuff, could use a little bit more pressure, like we were talking about earlier. That might not be exactly part of the structure per se, but I feel like that's probably one of its biggest shortcomings. Is that it is very low pressure.
It's like when those German exchange student come and they're sitting in English class and they know everything and they're better at you in English. I just like, bro, that never happened to me because, I came, 7 years old and I had to learn English as second language at first. And I actually, and I also learned foreign languages too, right? So much of my education had me interacting with actual syntax, with grammar, with how stuff are in that sense. Whereas people who grew up here speaking only one language, only thinking in one language and not needing to learn grammar in terms of the technicalities of what stuff are called, of how things should be done, specific conjugations and tenses and all of that. So yeah, when someone else come from a different country and show up in your English class and be better at you and all these things, including reading comprehension and critical thinking in terms of the actual content, it's like, hey, yo, like maybe we gotta do better in some ways here.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's like that's what I mean. Like that was literally what was in my head as I was saying that. I was just thinking like, oh, we got it pretty good here. But it's not as good as some of the other like European countries, and their education's is nuts. That was literally what I had in mind as I was saying that. Yeah.
And math, you're way behind as most of Asia.
Oh my gosh, yeah, exactly. Asia too.
Like what level are you doing stuff at? Like at certain ages, it's just like nuts. Over there is way higher. Obviously, there are many problems with their systems and how much pressure they have in so many ways, right? And there's obviously different focus on education, culturally speaking, historically speaking, that really affect the way the system has been shaped throughout the years, which also goes back to once again how important learning world history is. Because you're able to look at things and make sense of them and say, okay, it's not quite as simple. There's nuance to it and there's historical reasons and whatnot, right? So, but that's not the point I wanted to make. The point I wanted to make is that, in terms of math as well, there are things that we can be doing much better. So what you're saying about provincial level needing to have just higher standards, more pressure in terms of getting people to learn higher standards, right? At each age level, each grade level is a big thing. And I feel like in terms of university, you're right about things are pretty good. I think perhaps this goes back to one of our first episodes ever when we talk about the biggest problems in Canada, and one of the things. Well, the main thing that I brought up was complacency, and we could obviously see ways that things could be improved, but he also feels like things are pretty good, so nothing actually gets
Yeah.
done. And overall, that's kind of a theme of many different areas in Canada. And to say, okay, things are pretty good. You know, it's worse. Look at the States, have bigger problem. Look over there, they're suffering from all these things. Or we're doing so well, man. We'll appreciate you're so privileged in so many ways. Things, the systems are good, man. Just come on, yeah, okay. Things overall pretty good, and most people agree on that, but. And the people who complain a lot about so many things are pretty annoying. We could agree on that too. But there are also clearly that so many things could be done in better ways.
100%.
And there's literally examples of them. And there's literal issues that could solve relatively easily, like if we actually wanted to, but it just doesn't because of complacency. But another thing I want to point out with the university is that just from the two of us talking in the situations we brought up, it's very clear that it depends class to class, university to university. It's the way courses are set up, the class sizes, and all of those things. They're gonna differ, right? So if anything, you want to be thinking about these things for yourself and finding a place that's good for that. They offer you what you want, right? They offer you a style of education that's suitable for you, that allows you to more easily be engaged, which obviously increases your chances of learning and doing well. So a lot of that is really coming to yourself and be like, hey, what's the most suitable for me and what offers me that? And in terms of all the education institutions, it's like the good stuff we talk about literally from our experiences in them, right? So it's like, make all of those things like that. Well, there are some ways that's going to be very difficult for them to do that, and they are also run as businesses, right? So
some things just
which is that kind of argument that people make, like, hey, maybe they shouldn't be, but that's a separate conversation, right? So it doesn't make sense, like you're saying, for them to do certain things all like the way that we like. And also you got to realize some people don't like that. Some people say that they don't actually care too much about the thing at all. They don't really want to be engaged or putting the effort and learn, and they like just having multiple choice exam to guess, right? They like being able to just sit in lecture and just not get too much out of it, and it's fine. We're just not show up to a lecture at all. Like, they're just people who come to university for different reasons, who want different things out of it, and who are okay with certain things not being done in a way that maximizes their learning or how well they're doing in class, because they don't really care about learning that much, and they don't really care about how well they do in a class. It's different situations for everyone. So it's kind of difficult to ask a education, especially a tertiary institution like universities, to change their structure and how things are done to a way that you like, that really benefit you because you think it engages for a lot of people as well, which could be true, but at the same time, like, it's just very difficult for you to ask them because of all of these different variables. So that's why I bring up the point that it's more like for you to think about for yourself what's the most suitable situation for me and who actually offers me that.
Yeah, it's very pragmatic. Yeah, I absolutely agree 100%, because it's not feasible to enact the sorts of, I guess, ideal changes to the system. It's just it just wouldn't work right now. It'd be too difficult to set something up like that. There's too many weird little logistical things that would pop up. But like you mentioned, with that knowledge of yourself and what you like, you can really tailor it to have your best experience. If you just think about what you're going to do the best in, or what environment is the best for you to learn in, and then you use that information to, as you're considering what courses to take, or what you should be studying at all in the first place. Sometimes even very useful knowledge. 100% agree. It's not something that's really talked about either. I guess, now you think about it, a lot of people don't even really think about it when they're considering a course or whatever. They're just like, oh, it's a course, I gotta take it. Especially if it's a prereq for something, they're not going to be thinking about things like that. They're just focused on the course. But I think it's actually really good to think about how you're going to be doing the course based on how it's structured.
Yeah. And also, like, for a lot of people, even choosing the university is based out of like prestige and reputation and whatnot, and instead of like how relevant it is for them and how well they think they could actually do based on the way it's structured. Man, there's something I want to bring up. There's a couple things. I remember the second thing, but I don't want to get into that right now. Oh man, what was I trying to say here? I'm losing power, man. Is there? Yeah. What were you saying? The people different. Okay, for them. No, those are points I brought up. You agree with? Man, I can't remember that. I'll just go into the second point first, and hopefully the first point come up.
All right.
I remember it being pretty good too. The second thing I wanted to talk about though is just quickly bring up, because I feel like we touch on this. We actually did a whole episode on traveling, right? So one of the things you look at people now as well, but especially before, like you talk about. Nobles, you talk about higher class people, like a century and a half ago, 2 centuries ago, and whatnot. So much of their education is kind of finished off by doing a tour of Europe, especially going to a place like Italy, right? Because classical education, right? Because there's so much relevancy there. And nowadays, you talk about a lot of people studying abroad. You talk about international students. You talk about exchange students. You talk about abroad experiences, even for a month or for a couple of weeks during reading breaks, during winter breaks, when summers and whatnot. But there are just so many opportunities. So in terms of education systems, these opportunities oftentimes can be really valuable. And why they're valuable, I feel like that's a lot of that has to do with what we talked about in our traveling episode. And there's just a lot to get into. So
it's a whole different can of worms,
not gonna do that now. So yeah, that's just the last thing I want to bring up. Still can't remember the first point though. Which is very unfortunate. Tragic. Yeah, very tragic. Yeah. I feel like it's coming back to me, but it isn't.
Oh, that's the worst feeling.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, it is. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was gonna say. Yes, I remember now that. Yeah, it's very difficult for them to make a lot of those changes that we talked about, because when it comes to how much student they're taking in and the amount of basic courses that exist, you're going to have a lot of students in those basic courses, and they literally don't have enough professors or classrooms for all of those basic classes to be smaller sizes and structured in a way. And also, it wouldn't be fair that all these students taking these courses are being marked so differently, because they have different professors and in different classrooms of different sizes, right? So it kind of makes sense in that way why they are done, where so many of the first year courses are in large lecture halls taught by a few professors and are done with multiple choice exams. There are very good reasons for that, because there are very big problems that come with trying to make them small, trying to make them, So I get it. I definitely get it. And I'll bring up, like, not just are there, like, I'm telling you, like, I'm giving an example of some of the limitations they have and restrictions they have, and why it's done. So I'm not just saying that they are. We're not just saying that's difficult. Like, here are some of like legitimate reasons why they can't just do that, right? So I get it, but at the same time, it's like, are there better ways? Because there's a problem with the way we're doing it now as well. So, and to just end off, highlights of the week.
Highlights of the week. Highlight. Not much, to be honest. Just getting ready for the calm before the storm, for exam season. Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Other than that, it's been pretty
Yeah.
chill.
Highlights for me. Well, relating to school education, I would say, um, been really productive the last few days.
Hey.
Hopefully, that could really continue because there's so much stuff due in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And if I stay on top of everything consistently, it should be no problem. But if I don't, it's not going to be a fun time. Other highlight is that I finished the Lasso series, the second season. I also started watching the first season not too long ago because I don't have Apple TV. Don't question how I'm watching these. But man, I think I cried on average one time per episode
Really?
throughout the 2 seasons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was for different reasons. The show was just that good,
dude.
man. It just gets me in different ways, time and time again, and it was just incredible show, man.
Might have to check it out.
Absolutely a masterpiece. But I understand if you're not into that type of humor, if you're not into perhaps the sport of world football, you might not be as into it. Different people have different tastes, and perhaps based on your experiences and who you are, it's not going to affect you emotionally like it has for me. And perhaps you're just not a person who opens up to entertainment in that way, whereas I oftentimes only open up emotionally in those settings, and to really and just reserve a lot of emotions to things that straight up don't matter, like entertainment, or stuff that really matters, and all the things that are just kind of normal, everyday kind of things. I'm just very indifferent and nonchalant in those. So it's just kind of like, hey, those things, it doesn't benefit me to be emotional about at all. If I literally bump my elbow or stub my toe, I'm not even gonna react. If something bad happens, if it's not gonna bother me because I understand that it's not serious at all. It has a small effect, but it's not a big effect. So those situations, I'm just like, hey, I really don't care. So I'm just gonna be indifferent and nonchalant about it, and just very natural for me to not have any major emotional response. So I reserve it for moments where I'm like, hey, it's actually really meaningful and serious. Or I keep it to stuff like these series, like Ted Lasso, where it really just doesn't matter at all. It's literally just a show. Where sports, or it doesn't have any actual impact on my life. So I'm like, okay, it's just kind of fun, and you actually get more out of the show and the sport and whatnot by engaging it emotionally in that sense. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like, it's literally just for your enjoyment, for you to maximize your experience. Yeah. So perhaps it's not going to affect you emotionally because we're not that kind of person. And obviously, like I said, depending on your experiences, the stories that's told and the way it's told, it's not going to connect with you in the same way as it has for me. But personally speaking, that was a major highlight for me because I really, really enjoy the show in so many ways. And it has really... made the emotional connection to me. So
that's very interesting.
Good job, Ted Lasso.
Didn't expect that highlight. That's very interesting. I'd have to check it out. It's on Apple TV. So.
Yeah. It is on Apple TV. And you know what? It's about... So the whole idea came up like maybe close to 10 years ago when the main actor, I forget his name. It's like...
Is he well known?
Oh, God. It's like...
Would I know?
Yeah, he's really well known. You should. He's like in different comedies.
Adam Sandler.
Nah, man. It's like, I forget the name. My bad. Very unfortunate. If you see his face, you probably know him. He's been well known in Hollywood for a long time now. Well, in this show, he has a mustache. That's kind of his signature feature. But he's just a white man. Uh, reminds me of Ed Helms a little bit, and reminds me of the guy from Ozarks a bit. So one of those kind of white man. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
But the show started off with the idea came up like almost 10 years ago, just from this joke, I think NBC sketch almost that they were doing, I think for the Premier League or something like that, where they had him, the actor, acting as a American football coach who moved to coach a Premier League team. And in a press conference, he didn't know anything, and it was just supposed to be a comedy sketch, right?
Yeah.
But then they actually turned this into a series a couple of years ago based on that premise. And him, I think even the name was the same, so the same actor, the same name, and they actually made it into a series. But the football club is a fictional one, and the premise is that the owner became the owner because she got divorced from her ex-husband, who was cheating on her with a bunch of women for a long time. And so they divorced. She became the owner of the club. That's one of the things that she got, I guess. And then she hired a new coach, and that coach was from like not even actually professional football, not even like professional American football. I think it might be a college level. I think it might be a D2 college football coach who turned one of the worst teams into a championship team, and it was completely random hire. I'm not going to get into why she hired him. That's part of the series we talk about. But the story is about him coming into England to coach this Premier League team based in London, who was struggling at the time, who have a new owner. And he doesn't know the sport at all. He's not even a coach actual professional sport, and he's in that situation, and he's there with his buddy, a different coach who is really into chess and who's really into strategies and consistently read about the game of world football. And by the time they got there, he already learned like the rules and all the stuff, and know a lot about the history. So he's a very knowledgeable guy. But so it's him working with his buddy, and it's about them and their journey, but especially him coaching a Premier League football team. So a lot of it is his interaction with his family, his interaction with the owner, his interaction with the players, his interaction with the press. And they also deal with, obviously, football players, right? Footballers. So their time on the pitch, off the pitch, the different situation they go through. They talk about them and their girlfriends. And there's the whole situation playing out with the owner and the ex-husband, the owner and moving on, the owner running the club, and a lot of very interesting characters, a lot of funny situations, a lot of character development, a lot of really well-written, I guess, plot overall. And it was just so well done in so many ways, and I was so impressed, and absolutely weird, and just
made you cry consistently.
Just stupid, almost stupid premise.
Yeah,
right. Like the premise is really silly, right? So highly recommend that show. Yeah,
pretty neat. I'll have to check it out.
Yes, sir. And really excited for the next season. Don't know when that's gonna come out. I like the direction they're going for sure too. Right. So, yeah, awesome.
Alriady.
That's gonna be it from us. We've done actually really long episode with just the two of us, but we've gone into a lot of detail about many things, and education is something that's obviously really relevant to us as we're our university students, and we have thought about this because we learn about different things in our personal lives as well. So it's important to us in many ways. So Yeah, it makes sense why we've talked so much about it. Hopefully, got some value out of it. And we had a good time. We'll come back next week, hopefully with Raymond, maybe even with a guest again. Who knows? Thank you for listening this week, and we'll be back next week.